Jazz Club.
Hello and welcome to Big Wrist Watches. I was deciding on what watch I should review next in my humble collection, and it turns out that Omega decided for me when they launched the latest iteration of the iconic Speedmaster Professional just recently. The new Speedmaster has a lot of subtle changes, which we'll discuss later on in this video. I wanted to start off first with the history of the Speedmaster, which, as a watch enthusiast, you've probably already heard or read a few times over. So I hope that I have compiled it in a way which will reveal even more of it to you. Small disclaimer though, the Speedmaster history is very rich and I am not a guru by any means, so I'll sketch the story as I understand and read it. Know that there are many different variations of cases, dials, hands and movements, and they were used interchangeably throughout the years, especially in the first 20 years. I tried to sketch the broad lines in this video, but they are by no means set in stone. Now, on to the story. The year is 1956, and Omega is looking into developing a new timepiece, specifically engineered for timing the Olympic Games and automobile racing. A first prototype was developed and the very first Speedmaster was then released in 1957. Omega decided to use their caliber 321, which was developed in collaboration with Lemania, and used a column wheel as opposed to a cam to actuate the chronograph. The column wheel is considered to be superior to the cam because of the smoother operation and more difficult production process. This first Speedmaster, referenced CK2915, already featured many aspects of what is now known as the Speedmaster Professional, but it was still quite a different horse as we know today. It had a metallic bezel and a set of broad arrow hands, and it only measured 39mm in diameter. On the instantly recognizable dial it had the applied Omega logo, which is now a very desirable design aspect on any Speedmaster, and it used radium for its lume. The case, designed by Claude Bayot, was also notably different than the one you can buy today, with its straight lugs and symmetrical build. This first generation of watches was only produced for about 3 years, so these are the most expensive and desirable Speedmasters on the market right now. The next generation, called the CK2998, was introduced in 1960 and was the first to feature the iconic black bezel, which made readability a lot easier. The sub-registers initially also had alpha hands, which would later be replaced by the well-known baton hands. The case now measured about 40mm, slightly larger than the previous version. This was the last version to use radium, which means that a Geiger counter can give some kind of indication on the originality of the watch, but it's not a guarantee. The CK2998 was also the very first Speedmaster in space, when Wally Schirra wore his personal watch on the Mercury Atlas 8 mission in 1962. As you may know, there were 3 major space programs in the 60s and 70s, Mercury, Gemini and Apollo, which were respectively 1, 2 and 3 manned missions. Around 1963, the new reference 105.003 was introduced, which featured the well-known baton hands and step dial. It now used tritium as a luminescent material on the dial, but there were dials in the earliest batches which were not marked with a T. It would be produced until 1969 along with later generations, and it was first used in space during the Gemini 3 mission in March 1965, worn by Gus Grissom and John Young. However, this generation of Speedmaster is famously called the Ed White, because of the fact that he wore it on a spacewalk during the Gemini 4 mission in June later that year. The watch was also flight qualified by NASA in 1965. This qualification, performed by program manager and aerospace engineer Jim Reagan, included rigorous testing with changing variables such as temperatures, pressures, humidity, shocks and acceleration. The Speedmaster was the only one who passed with flying colors, while watches from Hamilton, Rolex and Longines Wittnauer were disqualified. Funnily enough, Hamilton didn't even offer a wristwatch but a pocket watch instead, which was of course instantly rejected. In 1964, the new 105.012 was introduced. It used the new 42mm asymmetrical case design with built-in protection for crown and pushers. This case is still being used to this day. It also now has the word professional on the dial, of which there is a persistent myth that they added that word after the NASA qualification and Ed White's spacewalk. Multiple sources have confirmed, however, that this is an urban legend, as the first ones were introduced before those events. In 1969, of course, the 105.012 became the legendary Moonwatch when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon during the Apollo 11 mission. Buzz wore his Speedmaster on his moonwalk because he's a watch guy, not because it would be of any use to know Houston's time while he was rocking around the moon, obviously. Now, Buzz's watch was famously lost during shipping when he sent it to the Smithsonian Museum after his return to Earth. The next generation was called the 145.012 and had a new design for its pushers. It would be the last generation with the now legendary caliber 321. It was worn by Michael Collins in the command module of Apollo 11, and it was also worn on the moon by Alan Shepard during the Apollo 14 mission in 1971. In 1968, the new 145.022 marked the end of the caliber 321, with the introduction of the caliber 861. Also based on a Lemania movement like its older brother. This was no longer a column-actuated chronograph movement, but used a cheaper and easier to produce cam-activated system. There were a few transitional models with the previous dial with the applied Omega logo, but Omega then started to use a painted logo instead. At first, they had the regular hippocampus case back, but later, after the moon landing, the case back said that the watch was worn on the moon and flight qualified. The first models were introduced with the so-called straight writing case backs, and later on, models got the circular writing case backs with the hippocampus in the center, which is still being used right now. Phew! So, finally, we made it to my personal 145.02271ST. It is powered by the 861 movement, and it still has the much desired step tritium dial, which was discontinued in the early 70s. It truly is in mint condition while still having its original bezel, dial and hands. Another great feature is the 1171 bracelet, which I consider to be the best one Omega ever put on a Speedmaster. The chronograph is cam activated, so that means there's a tactile click when engaging the mechanism. It still runs beautifully after 50 years, which is a testament to the reliability of the 861 movement. I wore this particular watch on my wedding day last year, so it's very likely this one will be a keeper and that it will be passed down to future generations. Another rare feat is the fact that I have a completely full set with this watch. It has its original 70s box and papers, along with an extract of the archives. Now, the first owner regretfully cut out the last page of the user manual for privacy reasons, because it showed his personal address. Yeah, you can't make this up. But that said, finding a set in this complete condition, this day and age, is nearly impossible. So this really is one to keep. It's my estimate that these 70s watches are going to boom in the years to come, just like their older siblings already have. Which brings us to the more modern Speedmasters introduced in the 90s. In 96, the new 1861 was introduced, which was now rhodium plated. Since 97, Luminova was used on the dial instead of tritium, and since 98, the so-called 1998 bracelet was used. I've never been a big fan of this bracelet because it's a little bit too bulky in my opinion. Then, just yesterday, Omega released their new Speedmaster Professional collection. Amazingly, the step dial was back for all models, and the applied logo made its appearance again on the sapphire sandwich. The latter is called that way, by the way, because of a sapphire crystal and see-through sapphire caseback. All Speedmaster Professionals now have the new 3861 movement, which is master chronometer certified by Metis. But the true kicker, in my opinion, is the bracelet. It is a vast improvement over the old 1998, and it's a wink to the 60s bracelet with reference 1116. The clasp also is a clear homage to the 60s and 70s clasp with a prominent Omega logo. I think it just makes the watch a lot more elegant and more reminiscent of its early predecessors. I just find it too bad that they didn't use the applied logo on the Hesalite version. but I get that they wanted a visual cue to differentiate between the Hazalite and the more expensive Sapphire version. So, we are drawing to the end of the story, finally, you will say. Notice that I didn't mention any of the many limited editions that Omega produced over the years. Mainly this is because of the fact that I'm not a big fan of these, and it would also cost me another hour or so to go through them. There sure are some beautiful iterations, which I really like, but I just don't want to compare them to the iconic plain black Speedmaster design. That said, there are a lot of fans out there, and obviously it's earning Omega a lot of money, so I can't really fault them. They are a company after all, not a non-profit organization. Now, of all watchmaking brands, Omega is still my all-time favorite. The watch bug caught me by watching GoldenEye and seeing that Seamaster on Brosnan's wrists. A watch I personally own now and which I'm sure to discuss in the future. Of all Omegas though, the Speedmaster is the most iconic one for me. I am a huge space buff, and there's nothing like being able to own a small part of space history. Now, I want to thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe, and I hope I see you next time. Bye bye!